Okay. All right, so a little bit of housekeeping here. We're still searching for the right bed softness. We're still searching for the right temperature of porridge. We're trying to hit the Goldilocks thing. So I'm gonna try to take a little bit smaller bites tonight and see how that goes. And as William was talking about, feel free to interrupt. If something, we're rounding the corner at 60 miles an hour and you want to pump the brakes, feel free to just interrupt, jump in and say, okay, what about this line? And we can do that. But also we'll kind of go at sort of 1-page bites this time, 2.5 paragraphs, something like that, and see how that goes. And we'll find our stride here pretty quickly. So we're on page 4. Anybody have anything that they wanted to bring up from last week or things you've been thinking about all week before we dive into the text? No? All right then. So we finished the introduction. We got into chapter 1, which is the Two Halves of Life. And basically what he's talking about, just to kind of catch us up, he's been talking about the container and the container and the content. Okay, so the first half of life is about building the container. The second half of life is about finding the content that goes in the container. And the problem that we have in the first half of life is that it is so all-consuming. As we're building our container, we're actually building a structured ego. We're building our worldview. We're building our platform in life, our physical platform, our career, our family, everything that we need to be able to survive in life and meet those basic needs of survival and security, esteem, affection, power, control. So as we're building those building blocks of our lives, it's so all-consuming that we have the illusion, especially our egoic mind has the illusion, that this is all there is. And the first half of life becomes an end in itself. And that crashes and burns eventually. The midlife crisis kicks in and we realize that there's got to be more. Somehow there's got to be more. The first instinct is to double down on the first half of life, go back to the last time that we felt secure, rather than to press forward into the second, where everything that we know and all the tools we've been using have to be called into question. We have to be willing to let them go. So that's the case that he's been building here. And then in the first paragraph here on page 4, we'll pick it up. Y'all ready? Mm-hmm. All right. In our formative years, we are so self-preoccupied that we are both overly defensive and overly offensive at the same time, with little time left for simply living, pure friendship, useless beauty, or moments of communion with nature or anything. Yet that kind of ego structuring is exactly what a young person partly needs to get through the first 20 years or so, and what tribes need to survive. Maybe it is what humanity needed to get started. Good fences make good neighbors, Robert Frost said. But he also presumed that you don't just build fences. You eventually need to cross beyond them too, to actually meet the neighbor. So we need boundaries, identity, safety, and some degree of order and consistency to get started personally and culturally. We also need to feel special. We need our narcissistic fix. And by that I mean, we all need some successes, response, and positive feedback early in life, or we will spend the rest of our lives demanding it or bemoaning its lack from others. There is a good and needed narcissism, if you want to call it that. You have to first have an ego structure to then let go of it and move beyond it. Responding to John the Baptist's hardline approach, Jesus maintains both sides of this equation when he says, "No man born of woman is greater than John the Baptizer. Yet the least who enters the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is." Is that double talk? No, it's second half of life talk. Okay, let's pause there for a moment. There's a lot of stuff already in all of this. We're talking about the ego structure being exactly what we need. We have to build fences. We need boundaries, identity, safety, some degree of order and consistency. We need to have a certain amount of narcissism defined as, right, being able to have the successes and the response and the positive feedback in life. Anything sticking out at you so far that you want to discuss some more?
Oh, maybe a starting structure to work from, like a stake in the ground that you're kind of grounding early on before you've moved on to the second half. You kind of have you're building this first half structure or essence or ego or whatever you call it. I'm wondering, the word structure stuck in my mind. I didn't know what others thought.
Was the structure bothering you, or?
No, not at all. No, just a way of interpreting what he's saying.
Okay.
You're building, I wouldn't say a building, but a structure, all these infrastructures, this network, this thing, I guess you call ego or whatever, that you kind of build a stable platform to work from as you eventually move and destroy it and move to the next level. But you have to kind of, instead of just being floating all over the place, you need something to start with. So a framework to work from.
Good.
I like the there's a good and needed narcissism, if you want to call it that.
You like that? That works for you, Lindy?
Well, I guess so. It basically is, it's okay to be a little self-centered in the beginning when you're setting up your container. But you first have an ego structure to then let go of it and move beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not all bad. A little bit of narcissism.
Little bit of, especially if you look at the way he defines it, that we all need some successes, response, and positive feedback early in life, or we will spend the rest of our lives demanding it or bemoaning its lack. That makes sense to me. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I was just going to add too, the same kind of thing. I think that I kind of see this as kids growing up, and not necessarily that everybody gets a trophy thing, but just that I think kids need some level of confidence as they're growing up.
There it
to
is.
feel like there's something good. And I think learning about your ego as you're sort of growing it is a good, healthy thing. And then as you get older, more mature, then you start learning how to let go of it when you should, maybe. So maybe healthy ego and narcissism in the beginning is not so bad, a little bit. Anyway, balance.
Yeah.
I almost wondered too, I was just taking a drink of water and I was thinking the glass kind of being the structure and the water being all the life stuff that we're dealing with. But early on, you kind of need the glass to kind of hold everything together. And then maybe down the road, you can get rid of the glass and have the water, go where it is. But right now, if you just did it, the water needs to be everywhere and you couldn't get anywhere. So you need a starting point. So that's my engineer brain, but I'm thinking that's.
Yeah, your engineer brain's working overtime.
Yeah, well, it has to.
Not only is that ego a good thing, but it's absolutely necessary. We've got to have. Can anyone define for me a healthy ego? Didn't we try to do that a few nights ago? Define a healthy ego. Was that you, William? Did you define a healthy ego for us? You're muted, buddy. You're still muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was saying I don't think I have a definition of a healthy ego. I would say one that doesn't restrict you too much, I suppose. Like one that isn't overly cumbersome. I would imagine that it would have something to do with like freedom and the ability to move around freely in terms of being healthy, but you still have desires and things you like and don't like and want, and need to pursue. And I think that's part of the healthy narcissism he's talking about there. Like by identifying things that you actually want, is how you engage in life. It's how you show up. It's just by starting from that self-centered place, essentially. And then you kind of make adjustments as needed. But that's kind of the thought that this line popped, sparked from it.
Yeah.
I think a healthy ego embodies some, you've almost right-sized yourself. There's a sense of your strength, and yet there's a sense of your humility that you don't have all the answers, and you're able to hold space for different sides of and perspectives of conflicts and all those kinds of things.
I like that too. That's good.
I look upon ego probably differently than most. Being raised in a very patriarchal society and during the 50s and 60s, you kind of gave up yourself just to serve others, and also being very empathic. Sometimes you don't know where you stop and somebody else begins. And also when I was on the other side and sent back, I asked what I was to learn, and it was, you've given your whole life for everyone else. You need to learn to do you. And that's when I flipped my opinion of ego. I see a healthy ego as being part of the human experience and something we need to navigate to.
Okay. And for any of you who don't know Patricia's background, when she's talking about the other side, she had a near-death experience or a death experience. So that's what she's referring to there. And Lindy, you probably didn't know that because you may not have heard that story before.
I didn't, but I almost assumed it based on what she said. Yeah.
Good, good. Yeah.
I'm going to bring my computer upstairs.
Okay, so this idea of a healthy ego, you're all, I think, hitting it right on. I would probably just add that for me, a healthy ego is one that does not preclude us, disallow us, or keep us from being able to be fully present at the same time. It doesn't keep us inside the illusion of our own worldview so strongly that we can't be present. And so if there's enough balance there, even if we haven't fully entered second half of life thinking and second half of life processes, but we're able at least to balance presence with abstract thinking. We can kind of negotiate between those two worlds. Then I think we've got a fairly healthy ego. It's one that someone used the word humility. I forget who that was.
Judy.
Judy. Yeah, humility. The idea that we still have you used right-sized too, I think Judy said right-sized and humble. So the idea that we still have an accurate view of ourselves in relation to each other, relation to nature, relation to God. We have a pretty right-sized view of ourselves, not humiliating ourselves, pushing ourselves down or pumping ourselves up. It's just kind of at that street level. I'd say that would be a healthy ego. But I like to define the ego as our interface with the rest of the world. That's the part of us that actually interfaces with each other through language and action and choices and volition and decision-making and all those things. So the ego is absolutely necessary, but we need it to be healthy enough that we can still be present to each other. And so what he's basically saying here is that as we're getting our start in life, we have to have enough of that positive feedback, the sense of confidence. That's another word somebody used in here, that we can perform, that we can do the things that we need to do, that we can move through those energy centers, that bottom tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we can get those things that we absolutely need as a human being. And that gives us the ability to be able to move forward in life and interface and do the things that we do. So one of the main takeaways, I think, from this section is that it's not, again, it's not an either or. It's not the first half of life bad, second half of life good. They are both absolutely necessary and they're complementary. And it's not that ego is bad and true self is good. They're both necessary and complementary as long as we're drawing breath here as human beings. So want to get that dualistic thinking as much out of our heads as we can and realize that these are all necessary and they complement each other rather than thinking them as one against the other, or that we're transitioning from one to the other. We're adding the second half of life so that it can include the first half, but now in a more balanced way. Making sense?
Yeah.
Have we mined those two paragraphs enough? Anything else you want to talk about there? All right. How we doing, William? All right. All right, let's go on a little bit more. Basically, if you get mirrored well early in life, you do not have to spend the rest of your life looking in Narcissus's mirror or begging for the attention of others. You have already been attended to and now feel basically good and always will. Do you know the story of Narcissus in the Greek myths? Where he falls in love with his own reflection and he can't bring himself away from the reflection. And so that's what he's talking to with Narcissus's mirror. So if you get mirrored well, in other words, if you have those responses, if you have those successes, if you have that approval of the first people around you, your family, your friends, school, whatever it happens to be, and you realize that you're accepted, that you have something to offer, something to give, something that other people want and are appreciative of, grateful for. So if you're mirrored well early in life, you don't have to spend the rest of your life looking in the mirror or begging for the attention of others. You already have been attended to and now feel basically good and always will. If you were properly mirrored when you were young, you are now free to mirror others and see yourself honestly and helpfully. This always will was interesting to me. Do you feel that's right? If you are mirrored well early in life, if you've been attended to and feel basically good, then you always will through the rest of your life? Come on, Becky, tell me. Tell us.
I think it gives one a good basis, but there are things that can happen, trauma, different forms of trauma, as you're growing up and you're still in that first half of life that I think can really damage someone's psyche and impact how they feel about themselves. So I don't think I agree with that.
That's exactly
That's
along the
almost
lines I was
saying-
thinking too. What were you saying? Who's that, Doug? Is that you?
I don't know. I was just thinking as a parent, does that mean if somehow your kid didn't turn out right, then it's your fault because you didn't do all the things to put the atmosphere around him in the right conditions? I don't know. I was thinking of it as a parent with a kid who's been rather difficult, so maybe I spun that wrong, but nonetheless, that was a reaction I had.
Okay. Okay.
I was just thinking how many of us here were mirrored well.
Yeah.
So,
Does anybody
I'm like,
exist out there?
yeah. So I hope he addresses that in the book.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe, the closest person I have in mind, but he's still a new person in my life is one of my son-in-laws, who I think probably had the best chance of having a more normal, if I could call it, upbringing, where he had two other siblings. He had a mother who stayed at home to raise him, father who was very stable household, very successful father, very present father when he was there, I've seen him be able to manage rough waters in a really beautiful way, and so I think there is something to that, but I always will was kind of catching in my craw too. I'm thinking maybe what could be said is that maybe that though people that feel like they've gotten more positive attending to than negative neglect or whatever, that they have a more of a resilience to recover more quickly, perhaps.
Mhm.
I don't know.
You know,
Good.
though, there's another side to this, which is my generation kind of went the opposite way, probably because we were seen and not heard as children. So we overly devoted to our children. We overly gave them trophies for everything, the whole self-esteem movement, right? And what it created is a generation of little entitled narcissists.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean they won't grow out of it, but yikes. I mean,
Yeah. Good point, Becky.
so maybe, and you know, the other piece that's missing here is nature. We all came
Yeah,
in with
nature.
different genetic qualities
Yeah.
that can make a huge difference
Yeah.
in terms of our resilience and how we get through those times in life that aren't smooth sailing. So I think it's fine what he said, but I don't think it's all inclusive.
Mhm.
Was
Oh, I
that true
think-
for your kids, Becky?
Pardon?
Was that true for your kids? Yeah, okay.
They're my
Yeah.
stepchildren, so I can say that.
Only half guilty. Okay. Okay.
Well, it's funny
I was
because
gonna-
Marion and I have talked about that a lot, because especially Marion, I don't want to put too many words in your mouth, hon, but what you talked about, being seen and not heard, and because Marion grew up first generation, and so her parents were old world, and so it was very much that kind of upbringing that Marion has talked to me about, and so yeah, we've overcompensated with our kids, and we see that. Trying not to be that because that was so harmful back then. But there's a balance, and sometimes you overshoot and the pendulum gets pulled too far to the other side. But yeah, there's a healthy balance. Now, if Judy's son-in-law, if he's got the balance, even so, always and never are problematic words, right? And so we got to be careful with that. So I know what he's trying to say here is kind of what Judy was talking about. There is a resilience there. There is a better chance that a person will be able to self-correct as they go through life if they had a good start, as he calls being mirrored well. But there's a lot of things that can come down the pike. Becky talked about the traumas that can happen in life, and I've certainly seen those in my work. And so it's there's a lot of things that can unbalance us again, even if we started out balanced.
Well, and I was just going to add too, not like Becky said, not just trauma, but I'm just thinking of somebody that grew up really self-confident with lots of support and positive feedback from parents and family. And then maybe they, I think of that person moving from a small pond to a great big pond somewhere else in the world, a career or school. And now all of a sudden they've lost their confidence. And so I kind of see it as ebbs and flows too, and again, it's that humbleness that, wow, okay, I'm in a way bigger pond now than I was before. I'm not so sure of myself, but then if they have that resilience to get sure of themselves and move to that next level, that's the best they can do. But it is ebbs and flows, and I don't see it as an always or never thing either. So
I always love
think
Mr. K.
resilience-
Go ahead, Danielle.
I was just going to say, I think resilience also gets modeled to us through our parents. If we've had parents, in spite of the genetics, all that kind of stuff, but if we were raised with parents who were resilient and really got through some hard times, I think that vicariously we have, we could pick up a little bit of those jewels. And it could be not just parents, but other significant people in our lives. I mean, when I look back at my life, all these people were stepping stones to get me to where I was today, influencers and stuff that all add to that resiliency factor.
And I think also there is some research that suggests that we can correct our early attachment patterns in our adult romantic relationships.
Yes.
If you're in a good, healthy relationship, you can repair some of those dysfunctional, patterns. So again, the always word is the problem here.
Mhm.
I was gonna get Robert and I t-shirts that say he's my corrective emotional experience. Because really in the context of relationships, it comes up when you're
All
in
the
those
time.
kind of relationships and you have the opportunity. I mean, also in a therapeutic relationship, offers that opportunity to have a corrective emotional experience. But couples, healthy partnership does that also.
Oh, Danielle, I knew you were one of those fuzzy romantics.
Oh, not that
A corrective emotional experience? How romantic
like
is that?
It's cool.
Psych talk.
I know, what can I say?
That's how it's coded.
Be careful when you marry a clinician.
I don't think she's talking about a slap upside the head either. Like, how
Well, those exist. Sometimes the slap just says it all. Just kidding, we don't slap. But
Great. It's great. Scary thing, Danielle, is I know exactly what you're talking about. Perfect.
Certainly worked in the Oscars.
Oh, someone had to say it. Okay, so basically, if you get mirrored well early in life, you do not have to spend the rest of your life looking in narcissist's mirror or begging for the attention of others you've already been attended to and now feel basically good. And maybe sometimes always will, kind of, sort of. If you were properly mirrored when you were young, you are now free to mirror others and see yourself honestly and helpfully. I can see why a number of saints spoke of prayer itself as simply receiving the ever benevolent gaze of God, returning it in kind, mutually gazing, and finally recognizing that it is one single gaze, received and bounced back. The Hindus call this exciting mutual beholding darshan. We will talk more about this mirroring toward the end of the book. Once you have your narcissistic fix, you have no real need to protect your identity, defend it, prove it, or assert it. It just is, and is more than enough. This is what we actually mean by salvation, especially when we get our narcissistic fix all the way from the top. When you get your "who am I" question right, all the "what should I do" questions tend to take care of themselves. The very fact that so many religious people have to so vigorously prove and defend their salvation theories makes one seriously doubt whether they have experienced divine mirroring at any great depth. There is a huge mouthful in that paragraph. So let's go back and take a look at a little bit. That's an interesting definition of salvation, no?
Mhm.
Once you have the narcissistic fix, you have no real need to protect your identity, defend it, prove it, assert it. It just is, and it's more than enough. This is what we actually mean by salvation, especially when we get our narcissistic fix all the way from the top. You probably heard me say a couple thousand times that to the Jews, salvation is spiritual liberation here and now. It has nothing to do with the next life. And I think that pretty much dovetails with what he's talking about. I mean, how liberating is it if you don't have to defend, prove, assert your identity? It just is, and it's more than enough. And there couldn't be anything more freeing than that. And so I think he's onto something. But how does that strike you?
Methinkest thou protestest too much? Because if you're defending it too much, you may not have it at all, right?
Oh, okay.
Variations on a theme.
Mm-hmm.
Methinkest thou defendedest too much?
So that last line, the very fact that so many religious people have to so vigorously prove and defend their salvation theories makes one seriously doubt whether they have experienced divine mirroring at any great depth. Anyone
I
want to
lived that as a
one?
Bible school professor's kid, taught consistent theology and all that stuff. So the object was consistently prove your thoughts, prove your theology, define your terms and all this stuff, which is consistent, probably good exercise. But in terms of understanding art, to define art, it's not the same thing as appreciating it, right? And certainly not the same thing as producing it, but it's an exercise that has to be done. But living with that alone, it can be quite sterile, I guess, to say that. Better, I wonder very much about the combination being able to analyze it sterilely, but also be able to appreciate artistically as a poetic thing, which I've appreciated about you, Dave. So that's it.
Okay.
What about living in fear? You know, if you're worrying about, you know, having to scream out you're in defense of everything you're doing because you're secretly worrying you're not good enough or didn't do the right stuff. You have to get acceptance of God to be saved versus just being content and at peace that knowing you're okay as you are and not having to be fearful and anxious. So
That's just wrong, Dave. Doug. That's wrong. Sorry.
You could take that a step further for radical religions that say that they want to convert others and push so hard that not only are they yelling out their salvation, but they want to make you believe what they believe. That's even a stronger push in my mind. I mean, there's nothing more more uncomfortable than that. Somebody's really pushing on you, you know, trying to convert you. That's an even stronger version of that.
Mhm.
Catholics did it with the Indians.
yeah,
Absolutely. Indigenous people sent to Catholic schools to be indoctrinated properly, right? There's not that long ago.
oh, in Canada it was terrible.
Yeah,
I mean, really bad.
but it happened here too.
Yeah.
Watch Geronimo,
Yeah,
for God's sake.
absolutely.
American promises and takes things, promises, but never comes through with it. So America's notorious for that. We're not that clean. In fact, it helps to say we're wrong, we made a mistake, as the Germans had to do because they lost the war. If they won a war, they wouldn't have to say that. We unfortunately won the war, so we never had to say I'm sorry. If we lost the war against slavery, against indigenous people, against the first phases of genocide, we'd have to apologize. Unfortunately for us, we always felt we were right. So America's never had to say, I'm sorry, but we're beginning to. I'm really pleased to see that. So little by little, we're getting there, but there's got a ways to go.
Some
Yeah.
awareness.
Well, can I say
Yes.
something about that? You know, here in New
No.
Mexico, there's a lot of reservations. And I visited a few, and it's very sad because, you know, you see indigenous people who have been forced to Americanize, but pushed off into a land and area defined for them. And most of them just live in poverty, you know, and education is really tough. But to your point, there's a very good book called American Genocide that kind of gives a lot of insight into what you were saying.
Yep. Movie on Netflix called Geronimo is useful.
It's very easy for us to move into the macro, but we need to bring it back into the micro, because what we're talking about is our lives and our first and second half journeys. So he's going to, in the next very next paragraph, he's going to make a jump into the macro as well. But I think the important thing for us is, why do people need to so vigorously defend their salvation theories, defend their egoic interpretations or the egoic structures that are created? And he's talking about this in this last sentence here. He says, if they're doing that, makes you seriously doubt whether they have experienced divine mirroring at any great depth. Mirroring defined as that narcissistic fix, right? That response to, that acceptance of, that gratitude for, that other people around us, if they mirror that back to us, then we feel that there is value innately in ourselves, that we're bringing something to the table that is relevant and useful and helpful to the group. If we haven't felt that at any level, then the ego is trying to grab onto it, cling onto it, you know, kind of create it out of whole cloth, rather than be able to flow with it. And so that mirroring is so important. As he says, all the way from the top, that would be a good definition of salvation.
Hmm.
And they get that reinforced in the church too, you know, so they've got this belief about the salvation message. And then, you know, back in the day, you know, the whole thing about going and evangelizing other people. And then you come back to church and you talk about it and everybody gets excited about what God did through you. And then, you know, you have people giving testimonies on stage. So there's all this, you know, reinforcements amongst your peer groups that just reinforces that ego dynamic that, you know, I'm affirming who you are in terms of this thing. I don't know if that made any sense, but I did want to go back to, I see why a number of saints spoke about the ever benevolent gaze of God returning in its kind, mutually gazing and finally recognizing that it is one single gaze received and bounced back. And when I read that, I recalled, you know, in the granola peep community, we would have different connection nights and stuff. And so you could do these connection exercises either as a couple or you can do it with other people that you don't know. But one of them is the eye gazing. And I don't know if you guys have done that as a couple, if you're in partnerships or with just a friend, where you just, for 3 minutes, you know, or more, you just gaze into each other's eyes. And usually, and in the context of that connection exercise is where the hope is to get to the point where we're able, like their thing is the God in me recognizes the God in you, and just really looking for that, for God in the other person. And so kind of stripping away what they look like, how much they weigh, if they're pretty or if they're ugly, you know, setting aside those judgments and just focusing in for 3 minutes. And I just, that when they said that bouncing back, you know, of the single gaze received and bounced back, that's what it feels like, you know, when Robert and I do it, or when I've done it with people that I don't even know. But that gazing in and the sense of presence that's there in that level of connection is just remarkable. It's very lovely. Do it with your partners. If not, do it with a good friend. Somebody that can maintain eye contact and not go freak out about it. But some people really, you know, everybody, for me, I guess I have an intensity about me. People have told me that, you know, quit looking at me, you know, because I tend to really tune into people. But anyways, so that's what that reminded me of.
I also underlined that when I read it, it leapt out, but I'm coming from a different place. I'm a new grandmother. And I go over and I see my little grandson, and I can stare into those eyes and he just stares back at me, and there's no verbal I mean, I can talk to him, but nothing needed, just this, I'm just wrapped up in him, and he appears to be wrapped up in me. And I really thought that's what I pictured when I read those words. It's just the single gaze received and bounced back. But I can simply get lost in it. And I feel so much that that's the way I think God is relating to me very often. I just feel like he's not bored with me at all.
Yes. Yes. Can you imagine that sense of connection all the time? That's what God offers us. If we just drop in and we notice, right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And
But
that's
is that
what
mirroring?
What's that, Lindy?
Is that mirroring?
Oh,
Because it feels-
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, obviously God doesn't have eyes for us to look into literally, but that's what the contemplative experience is all about. It's exactly that. It's getting everything out of the way that would break the gaze, but the gaze is inward. You know, the gaze is completely spiritual at that point, but it has the same sort of feeling. You know, there is nothing between you, and nothing hidden, and so what you're mirroring from your grandson is great. So he's getting all kinds of great mirroring, you know, from grandmother, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. If we feel like we're really seen, if we feel like we are really accepted, then the need to be defensive or offensive starts to just dissipate. And I think when we started the effect, the whole point was all we needed to do was try to get people to the point where they have experienced God's love. Because if they've experienced that, then everything starts to right size and fall into place, because they don't have to defend. They don't feel all of these compulsions because they are accepted as they are. And so the whole thing, all about the effect was, we're chasing the effect of God's love. That's the whole point of the effect. That was our mission, is to get that granular about it and say, all the rest of the stuff can go away. If we can just get people to have that mirroring experience with God, then they're going to figure it out on their own as they go. And so that's what he's talking about here. And that line is perfect in that. If we have that mirroring experience, a lot of these other obsessive compulsive tendencies really start to dissipate.
It made me think of this idea that, God sees what I see. God tastes what I taste. God experiences what I experience. And that kind of, shared gaze moment there.
Mm-hmm. The imagery of communion, actually taking into ourselves God, that's also there. It's the same over and over. We see these images. If we look at them from this perspective, we see where the person is trying to take us with their imagery, but it's to that same level of intimacy, I suppose is the best word, that shared gaze.
As I was hearing Lindy's description of that, I was thinking that this grandbaby has no words, has no ability to verbally, even behaviorally, probably exchange in any way with the grandparent, right, or parent, whoever. But they know, they certainly are aware that that gaze is on them. I've seen children, infants being just chatted about, handled back and forth, passed around, but not really seen. To have a grandparent or a parent, even though they're the sibling, to actually just sit there and look at them, they know they've been seen. Yeah, they're just not being passed over. They've been seen. And just the vision of that's incredibly powerful. Think about that. It's like seeing and being seen. So they certainly notice that they can seen and be seen. They can say nothing, but that part's certainly true. Neurologically, yeah. Beautiful.
I like that. I mean, it's like, as you were describing it, Lindy, it was like mirroring, I think, includes an element of, feeling felt by the other person.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
And that came across as you were describing that interaction.
And when I am looking into his eyes, there are so many wonderful feelings I'm feeling, and I'm sure that that's being conveyed,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pupils change, colors of the iris change, the face changes, this gentleness of the face changes. Oh my gosh, yeah. Lot of nonverbal stuff.
Now contrast
Beautiful.
that with what Becky was talking about, growing up in a home where, and the word will be confusing, but where children are seen and not heard, which means they're not really seen, not in the way Lindy's talking about.
No, that's right.
They're cogs in the fabric of the home, but they're not really valued or seen in that way.
That's
and so you don't get that mirroring. You don't get, the child does not get that sense that they are honored, valued, cherished, all those sorts of things. And that's what we as human beings absolutely need, to be able to be saved, to be able to be liberated enough not to have these obsessive compulsive thought and behavior patterns dragging us around by the nose.
Also, which needs no definition or defense, right? The infant knows they're loved. If they're able to ask that, they say, how do you know she loves you? I just see it, I feel it, I just know it, right? There's no need for defense there. It just is. It's like grandma's there. She knows that. She's aware of that. So she made the commitment to be there. As you said, Dave, you made a choice to be here with us. You could be anywhere else, but you chose this place at this hour. I think that's an example, a very good example of saying you care enough to be here rather than be someplace else. And I think that's beautiful. There's many aspects to it.
And I think we see it in people who have that mirroring. They're calmer, they're more serene, there isn't that constant urgency or need to persuade. It's just there's a different demeanor going on, and that's someone you can be comfortable with, and someone who you feel actually sees you. You know, you look at them and
Yeah.
you're not seeing the back of their head through their eyes. You're actually seeing someone
Yeah.
looking out at you. You know, there's a difference, and we know it. We feel it. Feel the difference.
And reminds me of this picture I have just posted of this kid and I. There's a point in time, this child and I, this kid was being fussy. I'll never forget this. And he's fussy and fussy. And dad gave him to me. And I said, just take a minute. So little by little, I talked softly and more quietly, and leaned more carefully, got quieter and quieter. I spoke softer and softer and softer to him. But as he and I at the last minute, we just voice to voice. He just leaned to me, put his head to mine. And it's that sense of being connected is a commitment of presence, right? And I think something like that comes to mind when we think about what's been described by Lindy there. It's fantastic. Those moments are just wonderful. Sorry, get a little soft here and weep here in a minute. The competition for Daniel's softness here, romantic.
Yeah, well, just don't call him your corrective emotional experience, right?
Thanks, Dave, for pulling me out of that. I was feeling like there was a big dive. It's going down. It's going down. Dave pulled me out. Thank you, Dave. That's usually my job.
All right, let's grab on another paragraph. We still got the time.
Thank you, please. Save me. Save me.
In the first half of life, success, security, and containment, looking good to ourselves and others, are almost the only questions. They are the early stages in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In a culture like ours, still preoccupied with security issues, enormously high military budgets are never seriously questioned by Congress or by the people, while appropriations reflecting later stages in the hierarchy of needs, like those of education, healthcare for the poor, and the arts, are quickly cut, even if considered. The message is clear that we are largely an adolescent culture. Religions similarly need to make truth claims that are absolutely absolute. And we want them for just that, because they are absolute. This feels right and necessary at this early stage, despite any talk of biblical faith or trust, which only can be comprehended later. And if you remember the stages of spiritual growth that we talked about, that's stage 2, where identity is with the group. That is where we're looking for the absolutes. We're looking for certainty. We're looking for the group to provide that certainty for us. It feels necessary and right at that stage, despite any talk of biblical faith or trust, which can only be comprehended later. Trust is something that does come later and in the second half of life. We all want and need various certitudes, constants, and insurance policies at every stage of life. But we have to be careful or they totally take over and become all-controlling needs, keeping us from further growth. Thus, the most common one-liner in the Bible is, "Do not be afraid." In fact, someone counted and found that it occurs 365 times. If we do not move beyond our early motivations of personal security, reproduction, and survival, the fear-based preoccupations of the lizard brain, we will never proceed beyond the lower stages of human or spiritual development. Many church sermons I have heard my whole life seem never to move beyond this first level of development and do not even challenge it. In fact, to challenge it is called heretical, dangerous, or ill-advised. Anything there stick out at you? He's kind of developing the theme that he has introduced earlier.
Well, just kind of thinking about, some of we've had this conversation in here, or at least in our discussion group before, about like what grows the church essentially. And it's it is what it is. You can't, you'll have a difficult time growing a church if you're not offering this kind of sense of certainty or clarity or whatever it is that we tends to get these religious movements going.
Mhm. Now, his point is that we all want and need various certitudes, constants, and insurance policies at every stage of life, but we have to be careful or they totally take over and become all controlling needs, keeping us from further growth.
Well, maybe it's like what Danielle was talking about, where when they get this movement going and where the group comes together and there's this, this fervor that's happening, that the church may not want to let go of that. So they keep everybody tight in this group with this group think and this group values, that then to go beyond and think for yourself is scary, because now the tribe is peeling off. And so they may not want that. They want to keep the group energized together like a real sales team, keep the music going and keep them energized together. Maybe that's part of the issue. That's got to be a struggle, I guess, for some of these big churches.
Absolutely. I always remember, when I was playing in a traveling band, and one of the places we played was at a Jafra convention. Does anybody remember Jafra?
Yeah.
Remember, it was cosmetics,
Right.
and it was sold as a kind of a multi-level marketing thing.
Yes.
And it was a jab. So there was, I don't know how many hundreds of women in there. And it was a, kind of a national or regional kind of conference. And we played our music, and then we're just kind of there watching, and they were whipping these women into an absolute frenzy. And they had these mantras that they were all chanting together, all of them together and going, and it was wild. But it kind of speaks to what you're talking about. Everything needs to be in lockstep. Everything needs to be in sync. This creates the sales force. This creates that, that unbreakable walls that we can live and be certain and safe within. And he says that we all need various certitudes and constants and insurance policies. We want them. I don't know if we ever really get them, though. In my experience, life has been anything but a certainty. There are certain things that I'm convinced of. I don't expect those things to change. But certainty, I don't know, that's sort of a different level. And so, but at any rate, if we keep looking for that level of certainty, clarity, whatever you call it, it will take over, and the tail will then be wagging the dog, and then there is no more growth. I know we've said in here that the opposite of faith is certainty, not doubt. It's certainty. And once you have imagined that you're certain, then your faith walk stops and all growth stops. And I think that's what he's talking about here as well. Tell you what, let's do this. We've only got a few minutes left, but I want to just finish the last two paragraphs so we can kind of at least bring his thoughts to a close, because then we're going to be at a heading. And then we can maybe be thinking about that more next week, and we can rehash some of this stuff, but at least it'll close off his thinking. The very unfortunate result of this preoccupation with order, control, safety, pleasure, and certitude is that a high percentage of people never get to the contents of their own lives. Human life is about more than building boundaries, protecting identities, creating tribes, and teaching impulse control. As Jesus said, why do you ask, what am I to eat? What am I to wear? And to this he says, is life not so much more than food? Is life not so much more than clothing? What will it profit you if you gain the whole world and lose your very soul? There is too much defensive behavior, and therefore too much offensive behavior in the first half of life to get to the really substantial questions, which are what drive you forward on the further journey. Human maturity is neither offensive nor defensive. It is finally able to accept that reality is what it is. Ken Keyes so wisely said, more suffering comes into the world by people taking offense rather than by people intending to give offense. The offended ones feel the need to offend back those who they think have offended them, creating defensiveness on the part of the presumed offenders, which often becomes a new offensive ad infinitum. There seems to be no way out of this self-defeating and violent ping pong game except growing up spiritually. The true self, you see, is very hard to offend. And now we're getting back to offendability. That is one of the themes that we have in here. You know, one of the main values of the early church was to become unoffendable and unflatterable. And yet we've lost that here, where offense has become a virtue. Just scroll your social media timeline and see how much offense there is. It's crazy. All right. Any last minute thoughts before we close for the evening? Okay, so you see where Rohr is headed here. You know, just trying to lay the groundwork for this thing. We've got the container and we've got the content. We get lost in the container and everything that's going on because of our needs that were not met usually in childhood, because most of our needs were not met. I think as, I forget who it was who pointed it out. Was that Danielle? How many of us really were mirrored well as children? Raise your hand, you know, that sort of thing. And we'll find out that probably not many of us were. And so those unmet needs and the emotional programs that we had to create to try to meet those needs are what is the barrier now to getting out of simply building a container and filling that container with the content of the second half of life. Even though there needs to be a balance, and there always will be, the second half of life always includes the first half of life. Later stages always include the former stages, not the other way around. Earlier stages can't include the stages that follow, but later stages are all inclusive and they bring it all together. And that's where we're trying to get here. And that's the thrust of this first half of this first chapter. All right, well, keep that in your pipes and keep smoking them this week. And we'll start there next week. And we'll be right in the middle of Holy Week next week. So this will be Spy Wednesday when we meet next. And if you don't know what Spy Wednesday is, look for your daily devotionals that'll start coming this Sunday, Palm Sunday. And if you're not on our email list, let me know and I'll get you on if you want to get those devotionals, because they'll explain all the different days of Holy Week and their significance and how they can hopefully help you to drive your spirituality forward toward Easter. Was that a good enough shameful plug for you all? All right, great. Okay, Scotty, where are you then? All right. There you are, Scott.
Lord, thanks for this time together with you and with my extended family. And we sure enjoy each other's company, Lord, and learning about you and different ways to encounter you and recognize you. I know you know all about us. You're not discovering anything new about us, Lord, but we sure discover a lot about you as we seek honestly to find out about your ways and your instruction and what delights your heart, Lord. So let us mirror those things properly. Let us have that great mirroring experience spiritually with you, Lord. Jesus, we thank you. We praise your name in which we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you on Palm Sunday. One way stream. Great conversation.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Good night, Lindy.
Good night.
Good night, Franctified.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
And Scott and Doug and Jordana and Linda. Sherry, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, that's great. Good to hear you, dear.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
See you guys.
Bye, Linda. Bye, Dave. See you guys Sunday.
Bye.
All right.